Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be reading some articles from History Magazine. Tonight is just a bunch of biographies. There's this section you can see here called Profiles, which is just a random biography. But we're also going to read a main article in here, since it's also kind of a biography. We're going to read about Buddha, the journey to enlightenment. The other biographies we're going to read are about Vivaldi, Carlota of Belgium, and Houdini. Now, these articles were chosen by my channel members. These articles were chosen by Chris W., Marta, Alessia, Fiona, Baby's Whispers, Alex, and Robot Canary. Thank you all so much for suggesting these topics. And if you would like to suggest a topic, in fact, if you want to help suggest the February article, you can become a channel member by clicking the little join button. It should be right about there or so. If you are on PC, if you are on a mobile device and it's not there, you can open the description box. It'll be the very first link there. It's only 99 US cents to join. The cheapest it can possibly be. There's no levels. There's never going to be a price increase. It's always going to be the lowest possible price I can set it to. And you get all kinds of perks. You can watch all of my videos, early access. You get, what else? You get your name at the start of every video regardless. And yeah, you can pick the February article. It's just going to be one article. So I have two up. It'll be either or. So the winner is going to be the February video. So if you vote, you could get your name in the February video. And I'm hoping, if it works out, I won't know until February when I get the new issue. I'm hoping that the other article will be in March. So you'll still get your name in a video regardless. So if you'd like to do that, you can join right now. Check out the latest video about picking History Magazine articles and comment on that. And you can get your name in the next video. And with that all being said, let's just jump right in and start reading about the Buddha. Of course, I dog-eared this and I can't find it. There we go. Becoming the Buddha, the path to enlightenment. Around 2,500 years ago, a young prince sat under a Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya in northern India. His name was Siddhartha Gautama, and he was on a spiritual quest. According to tradition, he found enlightenment under that tree, achieving unparalleled wisdom and insight into existence. He became known as the Buddha, which means awakened or the enlightened one, and went on to found one of the world's great faiths. World of the Buddha. Artworks representing the Buddha often depict a calm, serene figure, but he and his teachings were disruptors. Buddhism not only broke with existing religious tradition in Southern Asia, it also abandoned the very idea of tradition as a source of authority. This revolutionary message of the Buddha is better understood through the historical context of India's Vedic religious tradition at the time of Buddhism's beginnings. Emerging around 1500 BCE, Vedic culture centered on worshipping the gods of the early Indian pantheon, venerating ancestors, and performing sacrifices to obtain a heavenly afterlife. Its central texts, written in ancient Sanskrit, were known as Vedas. The Rig Veda is the oldest. Vedic society was divided into castes, with the Brahmins holding the highest religious authority. The Brahmin caste was structured like a priestly community made up of several lineages. Experts in sacrifice, the Brahmins enjoyed a monopoly on sacred knowledge. But around the 6th century BCE, this monopoly was being challenged by members of the other two upper castes, the Kshatriyas, or warriors, such as Siddhartha Gautama's family, and the Vaishyas, or merchant traders, who were organized into guilds. Communities of traveling ascetics called shramanas, originating from non-Brahmanic castes, also began to proliferate. They lived as mendicants. It was among these communities that new spiritual leaders such as the Buddha began to emerge. Tradition says that Siddhartha Gautama was born in Lumbini, located in what is today Nepal, in the 5th or 6th century BCE. His father, Suddhodana, led the Shakya warrior clan. In some sources, the Buddha is referred to as Shakyamuni, the sage of the Shakya clan. Like many others at the time, the clan was organized as a loose confederation of warrior nobles. The Shakyas centered their power in the city of Kapilavastu. According to tradition, the Shakyas were violent and malicious. Perhaps these traits were common to warrior clans who had grown discontented with the prevailing Vedic culture and pushed back against the authority of those who enjoyed elite status within it, the Brahmin priests. The teachings of the ascetics, many of them similar to those of the Greek cynical philosophers, questioned the lifestyle and the theology of the Brahmins. At the same time, they seemed to reject the new economic order emerging in this period, which saw cities being established in the Ganges basin. Ironically, it was this buoyant economy that facilitated the proliferation of these groups of ascetics and priests who lived off the charity of others. Leaders in this new era began to emerge and promote these new ascetic teachings. Early kings of Magadha, Bimbisara, and Ajatasattu were very important followers of the Buddha, whose teachings also began to emerge at this time. Buddha's life. One of the earliest complete records of Buddhist teaching was committed to writing in the Pali language in Sri Lanka around 25 BCE. The Buddhist scriptures do not include a complete biographical account of the master. The origin story around Buddha that is familiar today began to coalesce around the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. These works absorbed snippets from previous literature. But these early semi-autobiographical episodes were not originally intended to relate the life of the master per se, but rather to frame and contextualize his teachings. How and why the legend of the Buddha came into being should be considered when analyzing this prototypical story of a young aristocratic warrior who decides to abandon his military destiny and seek spiritual enlightenment instead. It is important to understand that the life of any Buddha, or one who has reached perfect enlightenment, is viewed as being the last in a chain of rebirths. After many lives perfecting virtues such as patience, generosity, concentration, and wisdom, Buddhists prepare to be born into what will be the last life in the samsara, the cycle of existence. A future Buddha is known as a bodhisattva. Siddhartha Gautama, an aristocrat of the Shakya clan, was believed to be one such bodhisattva. According to tradition, the mother of a bodhisattva entering their last life was always a pure woman who would die a few days after giving birth. The Buddha's mother, Maya, did indeed die soon after giving birth. Bearing in mind this omen, her child was named Siddhartha, meaning he will achieve what he sets his mind to. The Buddha Karita, a long poem on the acts of the Buddha by Ashvaghosha, a prominent author of the 2nd century BCE, records that the infant Buddha was named Savartasida, but the meaning of the two names is almost the same. The bodhisattva was expected to follow one of two possible destinies, He might become a universal emperor and foster dharma, or right living, by means of the law. Or he might become a universal master of the truth and foster dharma through teaching about the reality of existence. Many stories around Siddhartha Gautama's early years are similar. He is recorded as having grown up in a palace surrounded by luxuries and experiences that bind him through the 5 cords of sensual pleasure, becoming desirous of and attached to things that he perceives around him through his senses. His father keeps him safe behind palace walls, leaving the young prince of the Shakya clan with little understanding of the outside world. The prince marries and has a child, but he still has no notion of what life is like beyond the palace. Around age 16, the time when young nobles are initiated into affairs of state, he ventures outside. One account of these excursions can be found in a collection of Buddhist texts called the Digha Nikaya. One day, the teenage Siddhartha Gautama goes for a ride around the park with his coachman. All is well until the young prince spots an elderly man. "That man, good charioteer, what has he done that his hair is not like that of other men, nor his body?" asks Siddhartha. "He is what is called an aged man, my lord," the coachman replies. "But why is he called aged?" asked Siddhartha, showing his naivete. "He is called aged, my lord, because he has not much longer to live." Then Siddhartha asks, I am too subject to old age?" The coachman responds directly, "You, my lord, and we too, we are all of a kind to grow old." Siddhartha decides he's had enough of the outside world for one day and asks to be driven back to his home. On subsequent trips, Siddhartha observes a sick man and a dead man. These encounters outside of the palace are traumatic for the cosseted prince, but above all, they leave him bewildered. He wonders how people, knowing that old age, sickness, and death exist, continue to live normal lives, even laughing and feasting. On a 4th trip beyond the palace walls, Siddhartha sees an ascetic meditating. This sight opens the way for the young prince to address his own spiritual conflicts. Here begins the so-called noble quest to find a state free from aging, sickness, and death. The quest for happiness that is not transitory. The quest for nirvana. Achieving perfect enlightenment will not be as simple for Siddhartha as leaving the palace, leaving his family, and cutting the cords of sensual pleasure. Instead, he becomes so averse to sensual pleasures that he takes up extreme ascetic practices such as long, uninterrupted fasts. Such hardcore asceticism leaves Siddhartha on the verge of death. At this point, he realizes that pain and penance have not delivered the spiritual liberation he was seeking. So, according to tradition, Siddhartha abandons the conventions of the ascetics of his day and decides to accept a ration of food. Beginnings of Buddhism. Meditating under a Bodhi tree, a sacred fig, in Bodh Gaya, Siddhartha discovers what he has been seeking, the root of endless suffering for millions of lifetimes. He becomes aware that in order to end suffering, it is necessary to end that which causes it, attachment. This is the perfect awakening, or sambodhi. Through this, he learns how to exit samsara, the cycle of life and rebirth, to achieve the state of nirvana. When he rises, Siddhartha will now be called Buddha. He begins to share what he has learned, telling his disciples about the middle way, navigating a life between sensual indulgence and extreme abstention. The pillars of his teaching are the so-called 4 Noble Truths. First, human existence is suffering. Second, suffering is caused by attachment or desire. Third, to attain salvation, it is necessary to eliminate suffering. Fourth, suffering can be eliminated by following the Eightfold Path, 8 practices that guide the way to enlightenment. The 4 noble truths imply a law of causality. Good acts bear good fruits, while bad acts bear bad fruits. Good acts do not spring from desire, aversion, or confusion. Nothing that is transitory can be considered true happiness. Before his death around 483 BCE, the Buddha and his disciples spent decades teaching across northeast India. Monasteries formed, creating communities of monks and nuns. In the 3rd century BCE, the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka the Great spread Buddhism to southern India. Buddhism spread farther through trade along the Silk Road, military conquests, and cultural exchange. The Buddha's teachings have endured, and Buddhism has grown from his original 5 disciples to some 500 million followers around the world today. Let me see, I think there's one other page of pictures. Yeah. The Buddha's last days. Here's a reliquary. It says possibly contains some remains of the Buddha. And I think this is... let me see. Let me see what the caption says, because you can see him up here. 18th century Tibetan painting shows the Buddha's parinirvana. His physical death. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it's like, I think this is him dying with his disciples around him. And then in this part, he is ascending to become like the eternal Buddha, I suppose. Up there in the clouds, see? This is the Dhammik Stupa in Sarnath, one of the first places that the Buddha spread his teachings. There's a lovely little statue here. Let's see, this is a statue of Buddha standing up under the tree, being enlightened. This is a beautiful piece here. This is, let's see, it says Siddhartha using his skill with the bow. So there he is up here. There's Siddhartha. And below right is his wife, right there. Some more little pieces there showing pictures of his disciples. And here's a Greco-Buddhist statue of a very thin, starving Buddha. But I'm sure still happy, right? So this is a photo of his birthplace, the place that, like the actual building where the Buddha was born in Lumbini. So as you can see, it's all very protected, and it looks like being excavated a little bit as well. But you can come and see his actual house. This lion pillar is really a symbol of Ashoka. He would erect these big pillars around. It says this one's at Sarnath. And the pillars would have all the Buddhist teachings on it, so everyone could come and read it in the town, and it would be topped by these lions. Let's see, birth in Lumbini. Oh, I'm reading that. What's this? Oh, a panel from Pakistan shows Maya grasping at a branch while giving birth. I'm guessing that's supposed to be her, but I would never guess that's her giving birth, but okay. And this is his father down here, you can see. Sitting very comfortably. Here is a stupa built by King Ashoka. This is at Sanchi. And it says it has a Buddhist reliquary in it, a part of his body probably. Looks like the Buddha's teaching there. There's just a picture of just a Brahmin, an example of a Brahmin. Here's a big map, what I assume is the spread of Buddhism. Let's see. Number 1, it says Vedic culture and Brahmanic culture both predominate in northern India. Then 2, it says Buddhism and Jainism appearing in northeast India. 3 is Ashoka. And number 4 is down here in Sri Lanka. So before 50 BCE is the red, showing the spread of Buddhism. And then after is this lighter color. You can see all the way to Japan, all the way down into Java. Let's see. This is a building in Sri Lanka where Buddhism was taught and was first put into writing. You can see a little stupa right there. And this is a fragment from the Rig Veda. This was written, it says, between the 15th and 16th century. And then, of course, this beautiful statue you can see has been swallowed up by tree roots. I wonder if it says where this is. This is in Ayutthaya in Thailand. Really cool. All right, let's head over to our next biography. I decided just to go in chronological order. This is Antonio Vivaldi, composer for all seasons. And if you've never heard Vivaldi, yes, you have. He did the Four Seasons Suite, Spring being the most famous. That goes dun 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 dun. It's a really pretty piece. All four pieces are really pretty. Honestly, the winter one is probably my favorite. It's like a little waltz, and the fall one is really like frantic, like a storm. It's really beautiful. But let's read about his life. The Four Seasons is about as popular as a piece of classical music can be. The timeless collection of four concertos, each representing a different season, sounds as dynamic and exciting today as when Italian Antonio Vivaldi published it in 1725. The work is among the best-loved pieces of classical music ever composed, but before World War II, only a few music specialists had heard of it. Even Vivaldi's name was an obscure footnote in musical history at the time. It wasn't always this way. Vivaldi was famous, lionized across Italy, Germany, France, and England as a virtuoso violinist and composer. His restless genius produced more than 40 operas and hundreds of concertos performed throughout Europe. Like his contemporaries Johann Sebastian Bach and George Friedrich Handel, Vivaldi was a shining light of Baroque music. Derived from the Portuguese word for flawed pearl, the term Baroque was at first an insult for this new style of music before it became popular. Written for instruments like the harpsichord and violin, Baroque sound is characterized by complex harmonies and passionate melodies that allow soloists the chance to fully display the range of their talents. Before he died in 1741, Vivaldi's music had fallen out of favor, and he descended into poverty. He died a pauper, and his name and his music slipped into obscurity, only to be resurrected centuries later. The Red Priest. Born in Venice in 1678, Antonio Lucio Vivaldi's life was marked from the outset by poor health. From the cradle he suffered from a lung ailment, a tight chest as he described it, likely to have been bronchial asthma. He grew up a social outsider. His mother was a tailor's daughter, and his father, while recognized as an eminent violinist in the orchestra of St. Mark's Basilica, had once been a barber. In his teens, Antonio began preparing for the priesthood, one of the few career options open to him. It had not escaped his father's attention, however, that Antonio was a sensationally gifted violinist. Vivaldi Sr. was almost certainly his son's first teacher. Using his own contacts in the Venetian music world, he may well have secured Antonio lessons with some of the city's best musicians. At the same time, young Vivaldi proceeded with his theology studies and took holy orders in his early 20s. His red hair and sacred role earned him the nickname Il Prete Rosso, the Red Priest, a name that suggests a colorful personality and quick temper. He may well have stayed an amateur musician priest all his life had it not been for a serendipitous job offer from the city's Ospedale della Pietà in 1703. Founded in the 14th century, the Pietà was a convent school for orphaned or abandoned girls. Wards with musical talent were selected and trained to perform in the school's choir and orchestra. In Vivaldi's day, their performances had become famous across Europe. Vivaldi was appointed to a post that combined his two roles as a priest and musician. Accounts suggest he was more motivated by music than faith. He claimed that poor health prevented him from too much priestly exertion, and on several occasions he was forced to leave the Eucharist halfway through. His affliction did not seem to affect his activities as a composer, teacher, and performer, which by his early 20s were prodigious. The Pietà's musical performances were a lucrative source of income for the institution. It was known for producing lute, cello, and harpsichord virtuosos. Lasting off and on for much of Vivaldi's life, his relationship with the Pietà was mutually beneficial. Vivaldi's brilliant compositions allowed his students to shine and brought yet more fame to the school. More audiences flocked to see the young performers and filled the Pietà's coffers. Vivaldi's teaching duties also called on him to produce compositions for the young performers, and in return for his talents, Vivaldi was given the financial security to write some of the most innovative Baroque compositions, concertos, and operas. Vivaldi became a master of a musical form closely associated with the Baroque, the concerto. In 1711, his first set of concertos for violin and string orchestra was published. While he was careful to comply with his duties at the Pietà, Vivaldi's long parallel career as an impresario began in 1713, when he and his father took on the management of the Venetian Theatre of Sant'Angelo, staging Antonio's second opera, Orlando Finto Pazzo. In 1718, Vivaldi took a leave of absence from the Pietà to assume a post as the director of music at Mantua, where he wrote the opera Tito Manlio in just 5 days. Situated in what is now northern Italy, Mantua was then under the control of Habsburg Austria. Vivaldi's time there opened doors for him across the German-speaking world, including at the court of the Bohemian nobleman and music lover Wenzel von Morzin, who appointed him master of music. Vivaldi had become drawn to programmatic music, compositions that tell a story often accompanied with guiding program notes. Among the music that Vivaldi presented von Morzin was a quartet of concertos with an arresting title, Le Quattro Stagioni, the Four Seasons. When he published this work in 1725, Vivaldi included poems that accompanied each concerto. The narrative scene of the concertos was heightened by these verses that illuminated what Vivaldi's music was trying to evoke. Death and rebirth. Vivaldi was at his peak in the 1720s, but by the late 1730s, storm clouds were gathering over the Red Priest. Musical trends and tastes were shifting, and work became scarcer. A profligate spender, Vivaldi had accrued debts, and his career began to founder. Soon his creditors started circling. In 1740, he set out for Vienna in the hope that he could secure some kind of patronage from the Emperor Charles the Sixth. I can read. Charles the Sixth. He had also hoped to stage an opera there, but after the October death of the Emperor, theaters were closed for many months. The timing could not have been worse for Vivaldi. Stranded, poor, and sick, the composer died on July 27, 1741, and was buried in an unmarked grave. Vivaldi's music was still played at the Pietà, but his reputation suffered. The Venetian playwright Carlo Goldoni judged him an excellent violinist and a mediocre composer. English musician Charles Avison placed him in the lowest class of composers, and William Hayes, professor of music at the University of Oxford, attributed what he saw as Vivaldi's limitations to the misapplication of his great talent. In the early 1800s, a renewed interest in Bach revealed the German composer's debt to the Venetian virtuoso. Vivaldi's legacy slowly began to revive, but even by the early 1900s, his music was rarely performed and known mostly by specialists in Baroque music. Recorded music would change all that. U.S. violinist Louis Kaufman's groundbreaking recording of the Four Seasons at New York City's Carnegie Hall in 1947 would catapult Vivaldi to worldwide fame almost overnight, thanks to the audience's ability to enjoy the stirring music on their phonographs at home. Whether on classical radio, TV commercials, or film soundtracks, the sounds of the Four Seasons and the rest of Vivaldi's known catalog soared in popularity over the rest of the 20th century, restoring the composer's rightful place at the top ranks of classical music royalty. So for pictures, here's Louis Kaufman, pretty much popularized Vivaldi. There's a concert at the Pietà happening here. You can see the girls' choir up here and the audience sitting down here. There's a flute concerto by Vivaldi here. And there he is with his violin. And this is a Stradivarius made in 1715, so probably what he played, maybe. Moving on to our next article, we're talking about Carlota of Belgium, the Empress of Mexico. Let me see, there we go. Intelligence, love, and beauty seemed to be the happy lot of the Princess of Belgium. She had managed to avoid the loveless marriages that were often the fate of royalty. Her betrothal at age 17 to Maximilian, brother of the Austrian emperor, was as much for love as for political alliances. The young bride was wed to a man with whom she was physically and intellectually compatible. The two would travel to North America, where they became Emperor and Empress of Mexico. Born Marie Charlotte, the new empress became better known as Carlota. Personal happiness, however, could not reckon with the turbulent geopolitics of the mid-19th century. In 1864, spurred by a lifelong quest to find a meaningful role, Carlota and her husband embarked on a catastrophic adventure to rule Mexico. The failed endeavor ended in tragedy and her husband's death. Carlota's mental health declined soon after, and she spent her long widowhood in seclusion. The Happy Princess. Born in 1840, Carlota grew up as the favorite child of King Leopold I of Belgium. The country had only been created 9 years before her birth, after it seceded from the Northern Netherlands in 1831. The princess and her 3 brothers were the product of Leopold's second marriage. His first had been to Charlotte, Princess of Wales, daughter of England's future George IV. That's the fourth, George IV. Charlotte had died in childbirth in 1817. Leopold married Louise d'Orléans in 1832, but he never got over his first wife. More than 2 decades after her death, he named his infant daughter after Charlotte. The Belgian king's links to English monarchy would become an important part of Carlota's childhood. She spent holidays at Windsor Castle, where she was influenced by her father's niece, Queen Victoria. When Carlota was 10 years old, her mother died of tuberculosis. According to M.M. McGowan, author of Maximilian and Carlota, Europe's Last Empire in Mexico, Carlota seemed to have a happy childhood despite the loss. It hit her hard, but her father became more attentive, which helped her. As Belgium's first king, Leopold brought his young, well-read daughter on state business to witness his famed diplomatic skills firsthand. The frustrated Archduchess. In 1856, at age 15, she met and fell in love with Archduke Maximilian. 8 years her senior, he was the younger brother of Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph. Along with charm and good looks, Maximilian shared her instincts for liberalism and reform. Maximilian's feelings for Carlota did not at first seem to match hers for him. She is very clever, which is a bit worrying, but no doubt I will get over that, he wrote to Franz Joseph, perhaps jokingly. Hopefully jokingly. Following the marriage, which took place just after the bride's 17th birthday in 1857, the newlyweds sought a role for themselves. Archduchess Carlota wanted to practice her ideals about reform, while Maximilian's lifelong plight as the spare to his brother's role as heir spurred him to find a meaningful job. An opportunity came along when Franz Joseph promoted Maximilian to governor of Lombardy, Venetia, in what is today northern Italy. The position, however, came with some problematic strings attached. Maximilian was expected to quell the Italian nationalists rebelling against Austrian rule. I can feel the thorns already, observed Carlota, but I can also foresee the satisfaction from doing something good. Maximilian tried to win over the nationalists by granting them more autonomy, but Franz Joseph wanted a firmer hand. When France's Napoleon III sent in forces to support the Italians at the end of 1858, Maximilian hesitated to act militarily, which enraged his brother. He was demoted and then removed. A year later, Austria lost Lombardy, but was able to retain Venice. Maximilian and Carlota sought to solve their disappointment by building a fairy tale castle, Miramari, on the Adriatic Sea near Trieste. They lived on site, and although Carlota was content for a while, planning the grounds, painting, and playing the piano, cracks began to appear in their marriage. Rumors emerged of salacious conduct by Maximilian, including love affairs and visits to brothels. Whether Carlota knew of his affairs is uncertain, but gossip circulated that the Archduke was not welcome in her bed. The pair's inability to produce children only fueled more speculation. International developments would present Maximilian and Carlota another opportunity to rule. Rather than Europe, their next adventure would take them across the ocean to North America. Mexico had thrown off Spanish rule in 1821, although Spain would not recognize its independence until 1836. Political instability followed, but in 1860, liberal forces led by Benito Juarez won control of the country. Mexico's northern neighbor, the United States, recognized Juarez's government, but was too occupied with its own civil war to provide him much support. Europe saw Mexico as vulnerable, and France's Napoleon III wanted it for himself. Encouraged by Mexican conservatives and Catholics, France invaded in 1862 and occupied Mexico City. To rule his new empire, Napoleon installed a European royal, Archduke Maximilian. Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph approved the appointment of his younger brother, but he advised Maximilian to insist on French military support and to be sure he was accepted as emperor by a majority of Mexicans. France held what many historians regard as a sham referendum that showed popular backing for Maximilian's rule in Mexico. The tragic empress. Sorry, I'm just checking my camera. Carlota saw the chance to rule Mexico as a noble mission. A monarchy is feasible, she insisted, believing that they could provide stable leadership to Mexico. Taking up residence in Chapultepec Castle outside Mexico City in 1864, the couple tried to build support by appealing to both Catholic conservatives and Juarez's liberals. Their so-called balanced approach succeeded only in alienating both sides. Carlota played a central role, presiding over the Council of Ministers and holding public audiences on Sundays. The Empress ought to have been the man and I the woman, Maximilian wrote. She prefers the drum, I prefer the baton. Political tides began to turn against the Mexican emperor and empress. After the U.S. Civil War ended, the United States began to more actively support the liberal government. In early 1866, Napoleon III withdrew French forces, abandoning Maximilian. The new Belgian king, Leopold II, Carlota's brother, advised Maximilian to abdicate, but Carlota forbade it. Nothing can release us from our oath. Desperate to save their regime, Carlota took leave of Maximilian, not knowing that she would never see him again. Back in Europe, she pleaded with Napoleon in person, but he refused to invest in the venture and recommended abdication. Hearing this, Carlota suffered a severe mental breakdown, believing that French assassins were trying to poison her. She sought the help of Pope Pius IX in Rome. During the interview with the pontiff, she attempted to spit out the poison. Perturbed by her behavior, her brother Philip, Count of Flanders, convinced her to return to Miramari. Across the Atlantic, meanwhile, Maximilian and his soldiers were captured by Mexican forces in May 1867. A month later, Maximilian was executed by a Mexican firing squad. The emperor was dead, and a short-lived reign was over. Carlota's health deteriorated at Miramari, where she was cared for by her husband's family. Her doctors diagnosed her with madness with fixed ideals of persecution. Carlota would eventually return to Belgium and her brothers, but her condition would not improve. Medicine was neither able to identify the cause nor successfully treat her psychosis, even though she lived for another 60 years. The former empress spent much of her life in seclusion before dying in the 12th century Bouchotte Castle, north of Brussels, in 1927. So here's a photo here of Maximilian and Carlota. Here's Miramari, really beautiful, looks like it's right on the coast. This is a mushroom that they think she probably consumed in Mexico, which might have caused her psychosis, I suppose. It's uncertain. Probably never know. Here she is as a young lady. Very beautiful. And a gift from her husband, a beautiful fan. All right, our last biography tonight. Sorry, there's people outside. I don't think my mic is picking them up because they're not terribly loud, but I'm worried that they're going to get louder. I'm kind of worried. But we're going to go through this last article. Houdini Unbound, the Great Escapologist. His name is now synonymous with breaking out of impossible situations and surviving death-defying stunts, including one that came with the warning, "Failure means a drowning death." To his audiences, Harry Houdini's skills seemed almost supernatural. But to Houdini himself, an immigrant who embraced showmanship to escape grinding poverty, his abilities were built entirely on intelligence, reason, and meticulous preparation. Always looking over his shoulder at imitators, Houdini spent his career upping his game and the stakes. In 1903, in Russia, he requested to be locked naked in a freezing prison van the Tsarist police used to transport prisoners on a 3-week trip to Siberia. To the astonishment of the guards, Houdini broke out after 45 minutes. From then on, his acts became riskier. He was locked into water-filled milk cans, thrown chained off bridges, and tossed bound in a packing crate into the sea. What drove him to these extremes during his relatively short life? The riddle of how and why Houdini pulled off such feats continues to fascinate his admirers, while the circumstances around his death still intrigue his biographers. Prince of the Air. Houdini's first escape was from the poverty of his childhood. Born Erich Weiss in 1874 into a Jewish-Hungarian family in Budapest, he immigrated at a young age with his family to Wisconsin, where his father struggled to make a living. Hardship and showmanship went side by side in Erich's childhood. He practiced dexterity skills with sleight of hand at age 6 and became a regular at circuses by age 7. His desire for success grew stronger when his father fell sick. In 1883, Erich set up an improvised circus along with boys from his neighborhood and performed as a trapeze artist. In a glimpse of his future flair for self-styling, the 9-year-old crowned himself Prince of the Air. I like that. Having tried and failed to work as a rabbi, Eric's father moved the Weisses to a New York slum. The young boy's early love for illusionism and tricks offered the chance of freedom from the fate that awaited so many young immigrants at the time: the lifelong drudgery of the garment trade. As if in preparation for the feats ahead, the stocky Eric trained by lifting weights, swimming, and boxing, while taking on a variety of manual labor jobs to make ends meet. A friend introduced Eric to the memoirs of 19th century French magician Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, considered the father of modern conjuring. In the 1890s, Eric added an I to Houdin to make his new last name and his career like Houdin. He also gave himself a new first name in homage to American magician Harry Keller. Under the stage name Harry Houdini set up a traveling circus with his younger brother, whose stage name was Theodore Hardin. The brothers featured high-wire acts, snake charmers, and belly dancers. The duo reached their long-sought acclaim with what became their signature act, Metamorphosis, first performed at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Dash tied Houdini up and put him in a sack, which was placed inside a chest. Once the curtain was pulled, Dash was revealed to have replaced Houdini, the speed of which astonished the crowds. Within a year, Dash was superseded by young singer and dancer Wilhelmina Beatrice Ronner, or Bess, who Houdini had married within 3 weeks of meeting and made his new partner in magic. They went by the Houdinis, and Bess became his stage assistant for the rest of his life. Although their performances, also consisting of traditional magic tricks, were popular, earnings were scant. Houdini knew he had to maximize the sensationalism to pull in the crowds. The Handcuff King. Experience as an apprentice locksmith gave Houdini the founding idea of his career. Arriving in a town, he'd alert the press. He would then call a police station and ask to be handcuffed and locked in a cell. Within minutes, he'd walk free. The media coverage from these stunts helped promote the Houdinis in shows. In 1899, entrepreneur Martin Beck offered Houdini a contract to perform in his theaters. Houdini now had a substantial income, and new horizons suddenly opened. He was performing in Britain in 1900 and Russia in 1903. His popularity led to an avalanche of copycats and doubters, forcing him to push his limits and defend his name, even winning a lawsuit in 1902 against a German newspaper that called him a fraud. Starting in 1908, his signature act was being locked in a milk can full of water. In 1912, he replaced the milk can with the water torture cell, where he was bound in chains and padlocks and submerged upside down. Public fascination with his daredevilry won Houdini star roles in early cinema. The plot of the 1919 movie The Grim Game centers on an escapologist played by Houdini. The Shadow of Death. My chief task is to conquer fear, Houdini said of his acts. He made himself undergo torturous self-training to avoid panic. Biographers have wondered what drove Houdini to such extreme acts. Some suggest it was to resolve the trauma of being a poor outsider. A target of anti-Semitic insults, Houdini seemed to have aligned himself with the emerging idea of the muscular Jew to counter the prevalent stereotype that Jewish men were physically weak. Houdini was fiercely critical of spiritualism, a hugely popular practice at the time. He regarded it as fraudulent. One reading of his career is an extreme rationalism in the face of death. Yet, for a man always prepared to die, the nature of his demise took his admirers and the country by surprise. During the height of his career in October 1926, Houdini was in Montreal to perform at McGill University. A student asked about his abdominal strength and whether he could withstand punches. When Houdini replied he could, the student punched him in the stomach. Houdini seemed to have been unprepared for the blow, which caused him a great deal of pain. Days later, on October 31st, 1926, he died in Detroit at age 52. The cause of death was peritonitis caused by appendicitis. Debate continues to rage over whether the punch had indeed been fatal, or if Houdini succumbed to an unrelated intestinal condition caused by his ruptured appendix. In his will, he left his effects and props to Dash, requesting they be burned upon Dash's death. Many myths have formed around Houdini over the years. One story was popularized by director and actor Orson Welles. In Audience with the Tsar in Russia, Welles recounted, Houdini made the bells of the Kremlin ring simply by lifting his hand. The story is highly implausible, not least because of Houdini's hostility toward paranormal performances. But the fact that some people believe it underlines a core contradiction of his career. This most rational man seems to do magical things. Nearly a century after his death, that same aura of the supernatural still clings to Harry Houdini. So here he is going into the water torture cell upside down. There's a poster here of the grim game, and if I bring this up, you can see he's here getting put in the straitjacket all chained up. Here he is all chained up, looks like he's about to jump into a river. It says the Charles River in Boston. Here's one of his straitjackets that he'd be all chained up in. A poster here what looks like a French film, Le Maître du Mystère, the Master of Mystery. I like that too. And here's some of his belongings. Looks like some cards. This looks like a paper cutter. Maybe he trimmed his cards to be a certain size. I'm not sure. Maybe part of the trick. But that is it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my channel members for suggesting these biographies. And again, if you want to help pick next month's topic, you can do that right now if you become a channel member. I really hope you do, because it's a fun little club we have. I like it. I'd love to have you join. It also helps support my channel as well. It's a very simple way to support my channel. But with that being said, I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a good night. Good night. Good night. Good night.